Okay, good evening, students. Pritam, can you kindly mute yourself? Pritam, if you can mute yourself, it would be great. Yep. Okay. So good morning, good afternoon, students, or rather, I can say good evening. Okay, no issues, Pritam. So let's start with today's topic. So let me share my screen first. Okay. So kindly, if any one of you can confirm whether my voice is clear and and you can see the PPT as well. If any one of you can.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Yep. Okay, in the chat box also I can see Abhishek is yes. Okay, fine. Okay, so in the previous classes we have seen the basics of if else or if else and elif statements, as well as we have seen the concept of while loops. Also, we completed the while loops in the previous class, and we will start with the for loops today. And again, the concepts of while loops and for loops are more or less similar, but again the syntax is different, and that we will see today. Okay, so uh, just a second. Yes. Okay. So again, whenever we are studying Python, we have already discussed that we can have only two loops, two types of loops. One is a while loop and one is a for loop. We do not have a do while loop in Python, but again, we can use do while loops, not in a straightforward manner, but again, we can write some codes and then we can implement do while loops. But by default, do while loops are not possible in the case of Python. Okay. So again, we have studied the while loops, and now we will go with the for loops. Now, a for loop is used for iterating over a sequence. So obviously, any loop, for that matter, is used for iterating over a sequence. So what can be a sequence be? It can be either a list, a tuple, a dictionary, a set, or a string, right? So what is a list? We know. What's a string? We know. What's a dictionary? We have discussed. The case of tuple and set, we will discuss it later. Okay. So again, a loop generally, a for loop generally is used for iterating over a sequence, and that can be either a list, a dictionary, or a string. Okay. Now this is less like the keyword in other programming languages and works more like an iterator method as found in other object-oriented programming languages. Now, what's the meaning of the second point? We will understand it better whenever we will study the object-oriented programming concepts in the case of Python. But for now, let us leave this and let us continue to the third point. Okay. Now, what's the third point? Third point says that so with the for loop, what we can do is we can execute a set of statements, right? Once for each item in a list, tuple, set, etc. Okay. So which means suppose we have a list, and suppose in that list we have three elements. So for every element of the list, what we can do is we can execute a certain statement or a certain set of statements. Okay. Now how we can do that? Let us see an example. So if I just go to my Windows, press my Windows button, I will just press CMD, right? I will write Python. I will be greeted by the interactive Python shell. So I will just, enlarge this. Okay. And what we can do is we can write a list called as fruits, or here I will give the name as L. And suppose the list has three elements. One is an apple, one is a banana, and one is a cherry. We have already seen these examples before, but still, since we are diving deeper into the case of for loops, so we will have to do them again. Okay, so suppose it has three elements: banana, apple, and cherry. So what we can do is, so for using a for loop, what we can do is we can iterate over this sequence, right? And for every element of this sequence, we can execute a certain statement or a set of statements. Okay, so let us write it like this: that for I in L. So what is I in L? I is nothing but the iterator here, right? And what will the iterator do? It will just iterate over all the elements that are present in the list. Okay. So what we will do? So we will write for I in L, and obviously since it's a loop, and we have discussed previously that whenever we have a loop, so obviously we will obviously have a scope of a loop, right? And again, whenever we want to define a scope, what we will do is we will use we will use a colon, right? And after using the colon, what we will do, we will just press enter, and we will give four spaces or six spaces depending on the editor. Okay. So again, if I want to define the scope here, so what I will do, I will write for I in L, I will give a colon like this. And obviously after giving the colon, I will press enter. and I will give 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. Okay. And what I can do, I can write a set of statements that will be executed for every element of the list that I'm traversing. Okay. So what I can do, I can write print of I. Okay. So which means every time the loop or the iterator of the loop traverses to every element, suppose this goes to apple, so first what it will do, it will just go to apple, it will print the value of apple, right? It will go to the banana, it will print the value of banana, and last it will go to what, cherry, and it will print what, the value of cherry. Okay. So if I write print and okay, and if I press enter, so again we can see that whatever we have discussed, the same thing is happening here. Okay. Now someone has unmuted himself or herself. Okay. Now again we can see that the for loop does not require an indexing variable to be set beforehand. Now if you remember that whenever we were doing the while loop, always before starting the while loop, what we did, we just wrote the value of I, or we initialized the value of I with some value. Okay. Now what is that? Because since we are using the I as the iterator, so in the case of while loop, before starting the while loop condition, we just had to declare or initialize the value of I, right? But in the case of for loop, we do not require that. So which means a for loop does not require an indexing variable to be set beforehand. Okay. So again, in the example also we have seen that whenever we are using while loops, we are always initializing the value of the iterator beforehand. But again, in the case of for loops, we are actually not required to initialize the indexing variable beforehand. Okay. Now, now again, since we are talking about iterating over a sequence using a for loop, so again we have seen that a sequence can be a list, a dictionary, a string, etc. Right? So we have seen an example of how we can iterate over a list. Now, secondly, we will see an example of how do we iterate over a string. So again, if I write for I in, for example, banana, right? So what does this mean? So banana is a string, right? And it's a sequence of characters, right? So the first character is a B, second character is a, third character is a N, and so on. So right, it's a sequence of characters. So what we can do using a for loop, what we can do, we can iterate over a sequence of characters as well, right? So what we can do here, so every time I will go to B, it will print the value of B. It can go to A, it will print the value of A. It can go to N, it will print the value of A, and so on. Okay. So again, after writing the for loop, we will give a colon, we will define the scope, and what is inside the scope, I will give 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. And what I will do, so I will write that for every element that the iterator I visits, I will print the value of I. Okay. So again, if I just press enter, you can see that I am printing the values of every character one by one at each line. Okay. So I hope it is clear till now. So see, these are the basics. We have discussed this earlier as well, but again, I hope it is clear for whatever we have studied till now. Okay. Now again, we have a break statement in the case of a for loop. Okay. Now what if you remember, we studied the break statement in the case of while loop as well. Now what is the function of a break statement? Break statement is nothing but whenever the compiler encounters the break statement, what it will do, it will just come out of the whole program. Okay. It will come out of the whole program. Okay. So again, we can use the break statement for a loop as well. We can use the break statement to come out of the whole program as well. Okay. So whenever we are using a break statement, it does not mean that it will just exit the loop. It means that it will also exit the program as well. Okay. So this is the one thing that we need to keep in mind with the it can be a misconception conception that we have, that whenever we are using a break statement inside a loop, it will just come out of the loop. No, it is not like that. It will just come out of the whole program altogether. Okay. Now, so again, if I take this following example, so if I have a list called as L, so L will again have the name of the fruits, right? So what I can do, I can write for I in L like this. And what I can do, so for every time I visits a fruit, I will just print the value of I. Okay. And what else we can write? We can write if the value of I is equal to banana, right? So what I can do, I can write break, right? So what will happen? I will just print apple whenever the value of I it will become banana, it will just encounter the break statement and it will come out of the whole program itself. Okay. So obviously in this scenario, what we can do, we can just we will just be able to print the value of apple and that's it. It will come out of the loop. So again, let us execute this and let us find out whether the same thing happens or not. Okay. So if I write enter, so again you can see that first and foremost it is printing apple, right? The value of I is apple. It is printing apple. It is checking, is it equal to banana? It is not. So I will continue. The value of I becomes banana. I will first print banana. Then I will check what, whether I is equal to banana. It is. So what I will do, I will just break out of the whole program itself. Okay. So I will just print apple, banana, and that's it. I will break out of the program. Okay. Now, so again, if I just want to show you an example that whether how do we break out of the program itself, let us see what happens. So suppose I can write the same thing for I in L, right? So in this scenario, what I will do, I can write the condition initially, right? So I can write if I equals to banana, right? So what I will do, I will break, else, sorry, this will not run. Uh, okay. And if not, then I will print what? The value of I. Okay. So again, in this scenario, what will happen? The first I will go to Apple. It will check whether I is equal to Apple or not. It is not. So what I will do, I will just come out of the scope of the if statement. And after the scope, what is happening? We are printing the value of I. So we will print Apple. Then the value of I becomes what? Banana. So again, I will check if it is I equal to banana or not. If it is, yes, it is. So I will break out of the whole program itself. Okay. So what I will do, I will just print Apple and then I will break out of the whole program. So if I just press enter, you can see that I'm just printing Apple and I will break out of the whole program. Okay. Now, again, in the case of while loop, we had encountered the continue statement. Just a second, students. So again, whenever, why do we use a continue statement? So with the continue statement, we can stop the current iteration of the loop and continue with the next. Okay. So what do we mean by a continue statement? Whenever the compiler encounters the continue statement, so what it will do, so if the continue statement is within a loop, right? So obviously in the loop, there will be various iterations, right? And now for one iteration, if suppose we encounter the continue statement, so what we will do, we will just skip that iteration and we will move towards the next iteration. Okay. So let us see an example and it will be much more clearer to you. So again, if I have a list called with the fruits here, right? And what I can do, I can write for I in L. So I will write if I is equal to banana. So if it is, so what I will do, I will just continue this, which means I will just skip the iteration and I will go to the next iteration, right? And next I can write what? Print the value of I. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that whenever the value of I is equal to Apple, I will first check that whether it is equal to Apple or not. So if not, so I will not go inside the scope of the if statement. I will just skip the if statement and I will go to the next statement. So what's the next statement? It is printing of I. So I will print Apple, right? Now next time, whenever the value of I becomes banana, I will first go into the loop. I will check is I equal to banana? Yes, it is. So what I will do, I will encounter the continue statement. Now, whenever we encounter the continue statement, so obviously I will just skip whatever is after this and I will go back to the for loop, right? So again, the value of I now becomes what? Cherry. And if I will check whether the value of I is equal to cherry or not. It is not. So what I will do, I will not go inside the scope of the if statement. And what I will do, I will just skip the if statement and I will go to the next statement. That is the printing of I. Okay. So which means whenever we execute this, the output for this program will be what? Apple and cherry and not the banana. It will just skip the iteration for the banana. Okay. And let us see whether this is the thing that happens or not. So if I just press enter, you can see that I'm printing apple and cherry, but I have skipped the iteration for banana. Okay. Now, again, we have another method called as another function called as the range function. Now, why do we use the range function? So to loop through a set of code a specified number of times, we can use the range function. Okay. So which means if I do not have a list, if I do not have a sequence of elements, and still I want to execute the for loop. So what I will do in that case, I will use the function called as range, right? Now the range function, what it will do is it will just return a sequence of numbers starting from 0 by default and increments by 1 and at the and ends at the specified number. Okay, so again, if I just write range of 6, let's see what happens. So it will give you a function called as range 0 to 6. Now what does this function actually mean? Let us understand. So if I write for I in range 6, if I write it like this, and if I print the value of I in each case, if I print the value of I, so first and foremost we will see that it will specify what a sequence of numbers, whatever numbers we have given in the range. Okay, and obviously whenever it is signifying a sequence of numbers, so obviously the number will start from a 0, right, by default, and obviously it will continue till what, the number that I have given -1, so it will continue till 5. Okay, now if I print I, it means we would be able to print what, from 0 to 5 and not the 6, because we are just till 6 means actually till 5 or at 5. Till 6 means actually what, at 5. Okay, so if I print I, so again you can see that we are printing from 0 to 5 and we are not printing the 6 because 6 is the ending condition. Okay, now what we can do is, so by default it prints from a 0, right? It goes till the number that we have specified -1, right? And also you can see that it is incrementing by a value of 1 every time. Okay, so again, if I want to change these default values, so again we can do that. How we can do that, let us understand. So we can write for I in range. Okay, what I can write is, I can write I can give the initial number, so I can give the initial number as, for example, 2, right? I can give the ending number, so for example I can give it as 6, right? Also I can give the increment value, so again let us give it as 2, right? Which means it will start from 2, right? It will move from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but again whenever we are giving the increment value as 2, so again it will go from 2, it will increment by 2, so it will go to 4, and that's it. It will not print anything else, because for the next increment it will go to 6, but again 6 cannot be printed because that is the destination till which the range should go to. Okay, so obviously it will print what, only 2 and 4. Let us understand, let us see whether the same thing happens or not. Okay, so if I just give a colon and if I print the value of I, so again you can see that it is printing what, 2 and 4. Okay, so I hope I'm clear till this. Okay, so again if you have any problems till now, I will give you 10 seconds of time, you can just ask me the questions. Okay, so let's continue further then. So again, okay, again you can see the same things that we have discussed earlier as well. So again, whenever we want to print from 2 to 6, so we can give a range, in the range field we can give 2 comma 6, which means it will start from 2, it will end at 6 but not including 6, right? And whenever we want to give the increment parameter as well, so what we can do, we can give the first index, we can give the ending index. Ending index is 30, so I will not include 30, I will go till 29, and every time I will increment it by 3. Okay, it will start from 2, the next value will be 2 plus 3 is equal to 5, next value will be 5 plus 3 is equal to 8, and so on. Next value will be 11, and so on. Okay, so I hope it is clear to every one of you now. Okay, so again we can use else statements as well in the case of a for loop, right? Now if you remember the function of else statement was nothing but if the above conditions did not satisfy, so what else can we do? We can go to the else statement. Okay, and whatever will be inside the scope of the else statement, we will just execute that. Okay, so again if I write a for loop like this, that for I in range, and I can write 6. Okay, so which means I will start from a 0 and I will go till 6, which means I will not include 6, which means I will go to 5, right? Now whenever the value of I becomes 6, so obviously the loop will not be executed anymore. So whenever the loop is not executed, so loop, again we can see it as a condition, right? So whenever the loop condition ends, so then what else we can do? We can go to the else statement and we can go inside the scope, and whatever statement is there inside the else statement, we can just execute that. Okay, so what I can write here, I can write for I in range 6, I can give a colon. So I can write print the value of I. And whenever the value of I becomes 6, so what I can do, I can write a else statement. And inside this else statement, inside the scope, what we can write, we can print, for example, the loop, the loop has ended. Okay, and if I just print this, you can see that I will print from 0 to 5, and whenever the value of I becomes 6, it will come out of the loop and it will go to the else statement, and inside the scope of the else statement there is a print statement printing what? The loop has ended. Right now, now again, the else block will not be executed if the loop is stopped by a break statement. So again, if you remember, I was telling you earlier that uh, if I use a break statement, it is not like that I will just come out of the loop, or I will just break out of the loop. I will actually break out of the whole program. So again, to implement that, we have given this example. So again, I will write for I in range 6, right? So I can write if x equals to 3, so what I can do, I can write a break statement. And if it is not equal to 3, so what else can we do? We can write a print statement printing what? The value of I. Okay, and I can write a else statement where I can write what? Print loop has ended, like this. Okay, now what happens in this case, let us understand first. So first and foremost, the value of I is 0, right? So if it is 0, I will check is it equal to 3. It is not, so I will just print the value of 0. Then the loop will increment by 1, so it becomes 1. I will check is it equal to 1. No, so I will print the value of 1. Then the value of I becomes 2. I will check is it equal to 2. Is it equal to 3? No, it is not, so I will print the value of 2. The value of I becomes 3. I will check is it equal to 3. Yes, it is, so I will break out. Okay, so if I will break out of the loop, so which means I should execute the else condition, right? But again, if I just use the break statement, it means that actually we are breaking out of the whole program. So if we are breaking out of the whole program, then also the else statement will again not be executed. Okay, so this is the example of how we can check whether we are using a break statement, we are actually breaking out of the loop, or we are breaking out of a whole program. Okay, so again, let us run this. In my opinion, it should print from 0, it should print 1, it should print 2, and that's it. It should not print anything else. So let us see what happens if I just press enter. Okay, I made a mistake. This should be I, so this should be break, else it should be printing I, and lastly there will be else statement where we should print loop has ended. Okay, where did I use X? Okay, my goodness, very sorry students, just a second. This should be I. Right, so again you can see that we are printing from 0, 1 and 2, and then we are encountering the break statement. And again, whenever we are encountering the break statement, we not only we break out of the loop, but also we break out of the whole program as well. Okay, now we can again have loops inside a loops, right? So again, in the case of while loop, we have seen the same. In the case of for loops as well, we can have the same thing. Okay, so again, if I have two lists, so one is the adjective list, and here we can have 3 elements. The first one is red, right? The second one is, for example, big, right? And the last one is, suppose, for example, tasty. Okay, and then we again have the list called as fruits. So this is the list. Okay, so what we can do is we can write for I in adjective. Okay, and for every adjective, what we can write, we can use another for loop, and we can write for j in L, right? And what we can write, we can print the value of I and j, right? So again, which means that for the value red, I will print what? Apple, banana, and cherry. For the value big, I will print apple, banana, and cherry. And again, for the value tasty, we will print apple, banana, and cherry. So let us execute this and let us understand how it actually prints it. So again, you can see the same thing, that again we are having red. So red apple, red banana, red cherry. Then we have big apple, big banana, and big cherry. Lastly, we have tasty apple, tasty banana, and tasty cherry. Okay. Now, again, we can have the past statement. So if you remember in the previous scenario, we have said that why do we use a past statement? So if I do not want to write a statement, so again, if I do not write the statement, there will be an error. But again, if I do not want to write a statement after all, and we do not want the loop to give an error as well, so what we can do, we can write a, or we can use a past statement. Okay. So again, if I see this example, small example, so I can write for I in, so I can give a list. List is a sequence. So I can write 0, 1, and 2. And after this, if I do not want to give a statement, so I can give 4 spaces. And if I do not give a statement, if I press enter, you can see that we will actually encounter an error, right? But again, if I do not want to encounter the error, but again, if I do not want to use any executable statement, so what I can do, I can use the pass method or the pass statement. Okay. So if I write the same thing again, and instead of just giving a blank statement, I can write a pass. And if I write a pass and if I press enter, you can see that we are not actually executing anything, but again, we are not encountering an error as well. Okay. So I hope it is clear till now. Now we have come to the end of for loops. So again, in the case of for loops, if you have any problems, I will give you 10-20 seconds. If you have any problems, you can ask me. I will try and solve the problem. After this 20-second break, we will start with the functions, and that is a very important topic. Okay. Okay, so if not, then we can continue with the next topic, that is the functions in the case of Python. Okay, now what's the function? We should understand first. So a function is a block of code which only runs when it is called. Okay, now let us take a synonymous example. So suppose you have trained a mechanic so that he can fix your bike, your car, and your scooter, right? So you have trained a mechanic initially, right? Now suppose after training the mechanic, suppose you own a bike, a car, and a scooter. Now suppose your bike breaks down. So what you will do, you will just try and fix your bike, right? So after fixing the bike, suppose your car breaks down. So again, you will try and fix your car. Okay. And again, after your car is fixed, for example, your scooter breaks down. So again, you will try and fix your scooter as well. Okay. Now, every time you try to fix all the vehicles one by yourself, it's a big problem, right? So what you can do is, you have initially trained a mechanic, right? Now, whenever one of your vehicle breaks down, you can just call down the mechanic and he will fix it for you. So suppose the scooter breaks down, call the mechanic, he will fix it. Suppose your bike breaks down, call the mechanic, he will fix it. Suppose your car breaks down, call the mechanic, he will fix it. Okay. So so a function behaves synonymously, right? So first and foremost, if I have a block of code that should be executed after a certain condition is met, so what we can do is we can write that block of code. So instead of writing that block of code every time for every condition's satisfaction, so what we can do is we can just write that block of code once, and every time that condition is satisfied, we can just call that block of code, and that block of code will execute for that condition. Okay, so that's the use of a function, and that block of code is actually known as what? A function. Okay. Now again, you can also pass data known as parameters into a function, right? So obviously, whenever we want to give some values to a function, so we can obviously use those values are known as nothing but parameters, and we can pass data as parameters into a function, right? And also a function can return data as well. Now obviously, whenever we are using a function, it can happen that in the function itself we will print the values what has been calculated, or else what we can do is we can just return the values that has been calculated in the function to the calling variable, or to the calling function, right? Suppose a function who is calling a function, so the values that are coming from the called function may be returned as values to the calling function as well, right? or what we can do, we can print the results in the in the called function itself. So either so we can see both, we will see both the examples on how we can do that. Okay, now let us move forward. So again, whenever we want to create a function in Python, so obviously we will use the def keyword, right? Def is nothing but the short form of define. So again, whenever we want to define a function, we will use the define keyword, and in short, in the case of Python, we call it as the def keyword. Okay. Now again, you can see from the first example that if I want to create a function, I'm using the def keyword. Then after the def keyword, I will be just giving the name of the function, right? And whenever it's a function, it will start with the opening parenthesis and will stop with a closing parenthesis. In this example, you can see that in the parenthesis there is nothing, right? But again, if we want to pass values into this parenthesis, we can do that, right? And those values will now be known as what? Parameters. Okay. Now how do we do this? We will see an example in the next slides, or next two slides. Okay. Now, so again, if I just give you a demo of this. So if I write def, if I write my function, right? So obviously I will use a opening and closing parenthesis, right? And what I will do is I will just give a, so again, since we are using a function, we will again have a scope, right? And again, whenever we want to have a scope, we will use the colon, right? We will press a enter, and we will give 1 2 3 4 spaces. Okay. So what should be inside the colon? The statements that will be printed once the function is called. Okay. So whenever a variable or a function calls the my function, so what will happen? Some statements should be executed. So what statements do we want it to execute? Let us understand. So we can write what? Print hello from the function. So suppose whenever the function is called, we just want to print that hello from the function. Okay. Now after calling the, after defining this, if I press enter, and if I face no errors, so which means the function called as my function has been defined, and the scope of it has been defined, and the statements that will be executed whenever we call the function has been defined. Okay. Now, see, if I just write my function like this, so again you can see it is a function. So we can know that my function is nothing but a function. Okay. Now what we can do? We can write my function. So suppose I am outside the function, right? And I want to just call the function. So what I will do, I will just write the name of the function. And again, since it's a function, I will do what? I will write a opening parenthesis and a closing parenthesis. So if I just write this, and if I press enter, you can see that the function called as my function that we defined earlier is called. And whenever it is called, the statements that are inside the scope of that called function is actually executed. So again, what was the statement that was inside the scope of that function? It was nothing but printing the hello from the function, this statement. So again, you can see whenever I'm calling the function outside of the function, so again it is executing the statements that were inside the scope of that function. Okay. Now uh, again, we can have parameters, we can have arguments. So parameters and arguments are the same thing. There is a slight difference. So again, what's the difference we'll study in the next slide. But again, let us understand what is the use of the parameter or an argument. Okay. Now, information can be passed into functions as arguments or parameters. Okay. Now, arguments are specified after the function name inside the parenthesis. So if you remember that whenever we wanted to define the function, we said that we have an opening parenthesis and a closing parenthesis, and in between the parenthesis in the previous example there was nothing. But again, we can give something in that parenthesis as well, and whenever we give some values, we will call them as what? Arguments or parameters. Now again, there is a slight difference between the argument and the parameters, and what is that we will see in the later in the next slide. Okay. Now, arguments are specified after the function name inside the parenthesis. You can add as many arguments as you want, just separate them with a comma. So again, in the example that is given below, you can see that we are actually using one argument, but again, we can use more than one argument. So whenever, suppose we are writing two arguments, so what we can do is we can just use a comma to separate the arguments. Okay. So again, we can see we will see an example of that. Now again, if I just execute this example, let us see what happens. So suppose I'm defining a function called as myfunc. Okay. Let us say it is a def. Okay. So define my function. And inside the function, suppose I'm giving an argument called as fname. Like this. Okay. We'll give a colon, and I will give 4 spaces. And what I will do, I will print what, uh, suppose IEM space, and I can write what, college, like this. Okay. So let us press enter. Again, you can see that there is no error, which means the function has been defined. Now, what the meaning of the function is, that whatever we will pass from the calling function, whatever value we will pass, that value will be saved in what, fname, right? And whatever the value that will be saved in fname, we'll just take that value, or let us write, just a second. It's a small mistake in the in the function definition. So what I can write, I can write fname like this. Okay. So whatever value will be passed inside the fname, so what will happen is that value will be taken, that value will now be taken and printed. Guys, can you hear me? And can you see my
Yes, sir.
screen? Yes, yes. Actually, there was a power cut, so I'm very sorry for that. I just switched on the hotspot in my mobile phone and then I'm connecting. Okay. So where were we? Okay. So we were in the demo. So again, whatever will be passed inside the f name, so that will be taken and that will be printed. And after printing that, I will just print what, a space and a college. Okay. So again, if I call this function, so what will happen? Let us understand. So I will write my function. Okay. And suppose I give the name as IEM. Okay. So if I give the name as IEM, what will happen? This string called as IEM will now be stored in fname, and whenever I will go into the scope of this function, what will I print? I will print IEM, because that is the value of fname, and then I will print what? I will give a space and then I will print what? A college. Okay. So let us see whether the same thing happens or not. So if I just press enter, you can see that I'm printing what? IEM college, right? I can again write, I can give a different value. So I can write UEM. So again, I'm printing what? UEM college. I can give another different value called as UEMJ, that is VM Jaipur. And again, I can write UMJ college, right? So I hope it is clear till now how does the argument actually work, or how does the parameter actually work. Now, Uh, now, what do we call it? Either we can call it a parameter or we can call it an argument. But again, there's a slight difference between the two terms, and let us understand what. So the terms parameters and arguments can be used for the same thing, right? What is that same thing? That is information that are passed into a function, right? But again, this is from a layman's perspective. From a function's perspective, let us understand what it is. A parameter is the variable listed inside the parenthesis in the function definition, right? And an argument is the value that is sent to the function when it is called. So again, if I go to the previous example, so the f name that we have defined whenever we were defining the function is actually what? The parameter. But again, whenever we are calling the function, whatever value we are passing as arguments, these are known as what? The arguments. Okay. So both are the same thing, but again, from the function definition, we can call it as a parameter, and from the calling definition, we can call it as an argument. Okay. So I hope it is clear till now. Now, so as I said earlier, that we can have more than one argument, and in this example, we can see that there are actually we are having two arguments. So let us see the demo, and it would be much more clearer to us. So again, let us define a function called as define my func, like this. Okay, and in this we will pass, or we will define two parameters, right? Not arguments, parameters. So we can write f name and we can write l name. We will give a colon. I will print what? The value of f name, and I will give a space, and again I will print the value of l name. So again, the function has been defined. Now what we can do, we can write my func, right? And inside this my func, I can pass two arguments. Okay, what are the arguments that I can pass? I can write IEM, right? This is the first argument, and after giving a comma, I can write what? College. So this is the second argument. Okay, so which means whenever I'm calling the function called as my func, and I'm giving two arguments, IM and college. So these two arguments, IM and college, will be stored in what? Fname and LNAME respectively. And after they are stored in Fname and LNAME respectively, what will happen is we'll just take the value of Fname, we will print it, we'll give a space, and again we will print the value of whatever value is stored in LNAME. Okay. So again, if I just run this, so again you can see that I'm printing the same thing. Okay. So suppose I can write Kolkata here, right? And I can write UEM, for example. So if I write this, so again you can see I will be printing UEM Kolkata. If I want to write Jaipur, so again I can write Jaipur, and again I can print the same thing, that is UEM Jaipur. Okay. So I hope it is clear till now how we can pass two arguments or two parameters. Okay. Now, if I want to pass only one argument, let us understand what will happen. So if I just pass UEM and I do not pass the second argument, so again there will be what? An error, and it will specifically say that my function missing one required positional argument called as LNAME. So whatever argument we are passing here was stored in Fname, but again it was expecting an argument for the LNAME as well. But since it has not got it, so obviously it will give you an error. Okay. Now, again, if you do not know how many arguments we will pass into the function, we can just use the concept of a pointer here. Okay. So pointer is nothing but it is known as what's star of ARGS. So ARGS is nothing but arguments, and star is for the pointer. Now, how many of you remember the concept of pointers? Anyone? If you can remember the concept of pointers, just say yes. Yes. No. Good.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. Now, if you remember, if I just give you an example, suppose we have a 1D array of 10 elements. Okay. And suppose the name of the array is A. Okay. So if by using a pointer, I want to specify the 1D array called as A, what do I write? Can any one of you tell me?
First of all, we need to give a loop, and then inside the loop, we need to write content pointer of a plus I.
No, no. I asked you the question that suppose I want to print the first element of the array using pointers. So what should I write? Anyone? Suppose there is an array with 10 elements and we are using a pointer to point to that array. And suppose if I want to print only the first element of the array, so what should I write, or what can I write using pointers?
So we can take we can initialize I at 0 and can write pointer, and inside the bracket we can write a plus I.
Okay, what you are saying is a right concept, but again, just tell me, if I write pointer of A, if I write star of A, what will happen? If I print star of A, what happens?
Yes, it will also work the same way.
It will print the first element of the array, right? So again, it means that whenever we are using the concept of pointers for arrays, so it means that if I write a star and if I give the name of the full array, so it will mean two things. The first and foremost thing is it is pointing to the whole array, right? The second thing is if I just print star of A, it means I will just print the first element. Again, if I can write star of A of 1, A of 2, A of 3, and so on. But again, if I just write star of A, it is actually pointing to the first element, and also in pointing to the first element, it is also pointing to the whole array as well. Okay, so the same thing will apply here as well. Okay, so let us understand how. Now, suppose we are having a definition called function called as define suppose my function, right? And I will suppose write star of kid like this. I will give a colon, and what I will write is I will write, for example, print uh, the youngest child is, and what we can write plus kid of colon -1. Okay, so let us let this be our function, right? And or not colon -1, I can write only -1. Okay, so let this be our function, so there is no error. Now what we can do is, so whenever I will be calling the my function, let us see what happens. So if I call the my function and I give the arguments as IEM, UEMK and UEMJ, the answer is the youngest child is UMJ. Now, who can tell me what happened here? Anyone? Anyone? Can you tell me what happened here? What's the explanation of this? Anyone? We do not have much time, so no. So if no, you just tell me no in the chat box or by unmuting yourself. You can say that. Okay, so there is something in the chat box. Okay, no, sir. Fine. Okay, let us understand what happened here. Now, whenever I passed the arguments IEM, UEMK, and UEMJ, now obviously, whenever we have passed these arguments, obviously these arguments, since we are passing more than one element, so what we can do is these elements that we have passed or these arguments that we have passed can be stored in a list. Okay, and whenever we are suppose storing it in a list, suppose we name the list as kid, right? And whenever we are naming the list as kid, what we are writing is we are writing star of kid, which means actually we are pointing to the whole kid list, right? And whenever we are pointing to the whole kid list, if I want to print the youngest child is kid -1, so what does -1 mean? It will mean that we will print the last element of the list. And what's the list? List is nothing but the list called as kid, right? And how do we define the list? We will define it as what? Star of kid, which means a pointer to the kid list. Am I clear till now? Yes, no?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Now, next is we can also pass parameters or pass arguments into a function in a key equal to value syntax. So key value pair we can also pass, right? So again, let us quickly see an example. So if I write define my function, right? And suppose I will give three arguments, three parameters, child 3, child 2, child 2, and child 1, for example. Okay, and I will print the youngest child is, let us say, child 3. Okay, so let us say child 3. So we can write what? Child 3 like this. Okay, now whenever we are calling the function, what we can write my function, right? And instead of just passing the arguments in child 3, child 2, and child 1, what we can write is we can see whenever we are giving the parameters, you can see that we have written child 3 first, child 1 at the last, right? So again, if I just pass IEM, UEM, and IEM, UMK, and UMJ, so obviously IEM will become child 3, but we do not want that. We want that the child 3 should be actually UMJ. So in that scenario, what we can do, we can specifically give the arguments as in key value pairs, right? So what we can write? We can write child 1, it was defined at the last, but again we can write child 1 at first, and we can write equal to IEM, right? We can write child 2 equal to UEMK, and we can write child 3 is equal to what? UEMJ, right? So if I print this, if I just call the function like this, then you can see that it is printing the youngest child is actually UMJ, right? So again, it does not if we just change the sequence of the parameters and the arguments. So we can use what? The key value pair method. Okay. Now let us move to the next topic. So again, if I want to give the values in key value pairs, right? If I want to give the arguments in key value pairs, and again we do not know how many arguments should be there or how many parameters are there. So again we can use something called as what? Double star KWARGS, right? So what is KW? KW stands for keywords, right? Key and word pair, and again the arguments, and again we are using a double star for this. Now I hope you all remember the function, the concept of dictionaries, right? Because if you remember that, explanation will come into effect here. Now let us understand how. So if I define a function called as my function, okay, and inside this, suppose I write double star and kid, I will give a colon, and I will print. Suppose I will print last name is, and let us write kid and L name like this. Okay. So now the function has been defined. Now let us understand what happens. So whenever I call this function, so I will write my function, and I can write what in key value pairs. So first, and I will give the key name. So it is f name, and what's the value? The value is, for example, IM. And again I can give the key as L name, and suppose the value that I will giving is college, like this. Okay. Now let us understand what happens here. Okay. So whenever I'm passing IEM and college, so I'm passing two key value pairs. Now obviously if you remember, whenever we had dictionaries, obviously a dictionary will store values in key value pairs. Okay. Now which means in the previous scenario when I used a single star, which means I was actually showing the values in a list, right? But whenever I am giving a double star, it means I will be printing, I will be storing the values in a dictionary. I will be storing the arguments in a dictionary, right? Now what's the name of the dictionary? It is KID. Okay. Now, so in that dictionary, suppose there are two elements. The key of the first element is f name, right? And what is the value of that key? It is IM. The key of the second element is L name, and what is the value of that key? It is college. Okay. So again, so whenever I have the dictionary called as KID, if I just want to print uh, uh, the element or the value of the key L name, so what we can do, if you remember, we use the concept of square brackets. So suppose we have a dictionary, we have two keys, f name and L name, and suppose if I want to print the value of the L name key, so what would have we written? We would have written what? The dictionary name followed by a square bracket, and inside the square bracket we would have written the name of the key. Okay. So again, if I do that, you can see that we are doing the same thing. So which means for the dictionary KID, I want to print the value of the key L name. So again, to print the value of the key L name, what's the value? It is college. So again, I am printing what? Last name is college. Okay. Am I clear with this example? Yes, no? Yes, no? Very quickly. I'm waiting for an answer because we have to complete the next slide as well. So very quickly, if you can say yes or no. Okay. So you prefer to write in the chat box what you won't talk. So yes. Okay, fine. Okay, so let us go to the next slide. Now we have something called as, okay, someone else. Okay, yes, fine. Right. Okay. So again, we can use something called as a default parameter value. Now let us very quickly see this example, and it would be much more clearer to you. So suppose I define a function called as my function, right? And suppose I say country is equal to, for example, Norway, like this. Okay. And I will give a colon, and I will print what? I will print that I am from, and I will print what? Country, like this. Okay. Now whenever I will call this function. So if I write my function, and I can write what? I can write India, right? So what happens here? Let us understand. So if I write my function and if I pass India as an argument, so what will happen? This argument India will be stored in what? The parameter country. Okay. And I will print what? I am from India. So let us see whether the same thing happens or not. So if I just press enter, you can see that it is printing I am from India. But if I just call this function and if I do not give any arguments, so what will be printed? The default value that we have defined will be printed. So what's the default value of country that we have defined? It is Norway. Okay. So if I do not pass any argument, it will automatically just take the value Norway and it will assign it to the variable called as country. And then I will print what? I am from Norway. So if I do not give any argument, let us understand what happens. If I do not give any argument and if I press enter, you can see that it is printing I am from Norway. So this is nothing but the default parameter value that we can define whenever we are defining a function. Okay. So it's already 5:58. I don't think we should move forward because then it would be late. So okay, let it be till this for this class. And again, let me stop sharing the screen first. In the chat box, what I will do is I will just give the Google form link where you can give your attendance, and also I will give you the Google Classroom code where you will obviously find all the PPTs and the recorded lectures for every session that we have had. Okay, for today's session I will be posting it within 6:30, so just watch out for that. So again, if you have any problems with today's class, you can stay back and you can ask me the questions. If not, you can leave and you can give the attendance in the Google form. Thank you. That will be all for today.